Chinedu and Akuna had been married for 7 long years, yet their home remained without the laughter of children. They felt the pain of childlessness, but it was particularly hard for Akuna. Each passing year, the whispers and sideways glances from the villagers became more obvious. Some even murmured that Akuna might be cursed, while others blamed Chinedu for their misfortune. They sought help from every known herbalist and traditional healer in the neighboring villages. Each time they visited a healer, they were given different herbs and concoctions with promises that a child would come soon. But each time, the promise remained unfulfilled. Chinedu would spend long days in the forest hunting for game, while Akuna stayed home, lost in thoughts and prayers, hoping that someday the gods would smile on them. One early morning, Akuna began to feel unwell. At first, she thought it was just exhaustion from the constant stress and worry. But as the days passed, her symptoms worsened: vomiting, dizziness, and a strange craving for bitter cola. It was then that she realized something had changed. What could it be? Her heart was beating as she told Chinedu. They sought out a local midwife who confirmed their deepest hope. Akuna was pregnant. After 7 years of waiting, a child was finally on the way. Chinedu was overjoyed. He couldn't contain his excitement and immediately called all his friends together. They celebrated with palm wine and goat meat. And for the first time in years, there was genuine laughter and joy in their home. The village buzzed with the news that Chinedu and Akuna were expecting a child after so many years. The long-awaited seemed to be finally over, and the couple were filled with hope for the future. As the months went by, Akuna's pregnancy progressed without any issues. Chinedu became more protective of her, making sure she didn't lift anything heavy or stress herself. He hunted day and night to ensure they had enough food, and Akuna spent her days preparing for the arrival of their long-awaited child. In those days, there were no hospitals or scanning centers to determine the gender of the baby or whether it would be a single birth or twins. The villagers relied solely on the words of the local midwives and the signs of nature to predict what was to come. When the time for Akuna to give birth arrived, it was during a cold, rainy night. She went into labor, and Chinedu rushed to fetch the midwife. The birth was long and difficult, and Chinedu waited anxiously outside their small hut, praying for both the mother and the unborn child. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the cry of a baby echoed through the walls. Chinedu's heart leaped for joy, but just as he was about to step inside to meet his child, he heard another cry, another baby's cry. Inside the hut, Akuna and the midwife were staring at each other in horror. Akuna had given birth to twins, a boy and a girl. The midwife trembled as she wiped the babies clean. Tears filled her eyes, for she knew the law of the land. Twins were considered a curse in their village, and they were to be killed immediately. When Akuna saw her newborn children, her heart was filled with love, but also with deep sorrow. She understood the terrible fate that awaited them. She began to cry, knowing that her joy had quickly turned into a nightmare. In the kingdom where Chinedu and Akuna lived, the birth of twins was considered an abomination. The villagers believed that twins were a curse from the gods, a bad omen that brought sickness, death, and misfortune. For generations, it had been the custom that twins must be killed immediately after birth to cleanse the village and prevent calamity from befalling the people. The law was simple, yet harsh. On the seventh day after the birth of the twins would be brought to the village square and pounded alive. The ritual was meant to appease the gods and protect the village from the supposed evil brought by the twins. No one dared to defy the law, for it was said that anyone who attempted to save their twin children would bring even greater destruction upon their family and the entire village. When Chinedu was informed that Akuna had given birth to twins, his joy turned into horror. The man who had celebrated just days ago now felt cursed by the gods. He collapsed to the ground, weeping. His long awaited children, why had they come in the form of an abomination? Anger and frustration welled up inside him. He began to question everything. Why, after 7 years of waiting, would the gods give him twins? Why had his wife, after all their effort, brought this curse into their home? He didn't know what to do, and his heart was torn between his love for his children and his fear of the village's deadly traditions. Akuna too was devastated. She had carried these children in her womb for 9 months, only to face the cruel reality that they were destined to die. She pleaded with Chinedu to find a way to save them, but both of them knew the power of the village's beliefs. The chief priest and elders had already been informed of the birth, and soon they would come for the children. Time was running out, and the couple found themselves trapped in a nightmare, unsure of what to do next. The following day, as the sun rose, a deep silence fell over the village. Word had spread quickly about the birth of twins in Chinedu's household. The villagers gathered in small groups, whispering among themselves about what would happen. No one dared to speak openly, but everyone knew the fate that awaited the newborns. Later that afternoon, the chief priest of the village, a tall man with deep scars across his face, arrived at Chinedu's house. He wore a long flowing red robe adorned with cowrie shells, and in his hand he carried a staff carved from ebony wood. Behind him trailed the village elders, all of them wearing grave expressions. When Chinedu saw them approaching, his heart sank. He knew what this visit meant. The chief priest did not waste time with formalities. He raised his staff high in the air and spoke with authority, his voice echoing. Chinedu, you have brought a curse into our village. The gods have spoken. Twins are an abomination, and if you do not follow the laws of the land, we will all suffer their wrath. Chinedu fell to his knees in front of the chief priest, his eyes filled with tears. Akuna, standing by the doorway with the twins wrapped tightly in her arms, also knelt and begged for mercy. Please, great chief priest, Akuna pleaded. Her voice was trembling. They are just children, innocent and pure. Spare them. I beg you, spare them, for they have done no wrong. But the chief priest shook his head. It is not for me to spare them. The law of the land is clear. On the 7th day, the twins must be taken to the village square and pounded alive. Only then will the curse be lifted from the land. Chinedu's heart broke into 1,000 pieces as he heard these words. The thought of watching his children, his long-awaited children, being killed in such a brutal manner was unbearable. Yet he knew that if he refused, the consequences would be far worse. The villagers believed that allowing twins to live would bring death and sickness to everyone. The chief priest pointed his staff directly at Chinedu and Akuna. You have 7 days, he said in a cold, commanding tone. On the 7th day, bring the twins to the village square, or the wrath of the gods will fall upon your house. With that, the chief priest and the elders turned and walked away, leaving Chinedu and Akuna in despair. Every time Akuna looked at her babies, she wept, knowing that they had only a few days left to live. Chinedu too was consumed by grief. He avoided the village and spent long hours in the forest trying to clear his mind. But no matter where he went, the thought of the impending doom followed him like a shadow. He considered running away with his family, but where could he go? The gods' punishment would surely find them wherever they fled. They were trapped, bound by the traditions of their people and the fear of the unknown. The villagers kept their distance from Chinedu and Akuna. While they sympathized with their plight, they were also afraid. No one wanted to get close to a family that was under the curse of twins. Mothers shielded their children, and men refused to speak with Chinedu when they passed him by on the road. On the fourth night after the twins were born, Akuna could no longer bear the thought of losing her babies. She tried to convince Chinedu to run away, but he was paralyzed with fear. He didn't believe they could escape the god's anger. In his mind, accepting the cruel fate was the only option. If we run, Akuna, we will only bring more suffering on ourselves. The gods will find us, and they will punish us even more. I can't lose you too, he whispered as he held her close. But Akuna's heart was breaking, and no words could comfort her. She lay awake that night, holding her twins tightly and praying to the gods for a miracle, though deep inside she knew there would be none. On the morning of the seventh day, the village was very quiet. The knowledge of what was about to happen changed the mood of the village. The villagers gathered at the village square, some curious, others somber, but all of them united in their belief that the ritual must take place to protect the village from the supposed curse. Chinedu and Akuna prepared for the darkest day of their lives. Akuna wrapped the twins in soft white clothes, kissing their tiny faces as tears streamed down her cheeks. Chinedu, on the other hand, was a broken man. His eyes were hollow, his spirit crushed. He could not bear to look at his children, knowing what awaited them. The time had come. Chinedu and Akuna made their way to the village square, where the chief priest and the elders stood, waiting. The large pounding mortar had already been set in the middle of the square. The crowd parted as the couple approached, giving them space, but no one offered any words of comfort. The chief priest raised his staff and spoke to the crowd. The gods demand this sacrifice. The twins must be pounded alive to cleanse our land and keep us safe. Akuna sobbed uncontrollably as she held the twins, knowing that in just moments they would be taken from her forever. Chinedu stood beside her, trembling, his fists clenched as he fought the urge to scream out in agony. He felt like a coward, powerless to protect his children from this barbaric tradition. The chief priest's voice echoed in the silence of the village square as he gestured for Chinedu and Akuna to hand over their twins. Akuna held onto the babies, refusing to let go. She looked at the chief priest. Her eyes were pleading for mercy, but his expression remained cold and unyielding. Chinedu stood frozen, torn between tradition and the love he felt for his children. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to protect his children, but the fear of what might happen if he defied the gods paralyzed him. The entire village watched in silence. "Bring the twins forward," the chief priest demanded again. With trembling hands, Akuna finally stepped forward, her body shaking as she handed over the babies to one of the village elders. The elder, a woman who had once been a friend of Akuna's, could not meet her eyes as she took the twins and placed them inside the large wooden mortar in the center of the village square. The moment the twins were placed inside the mortar, the atmosphere in the village square changed. The chief priest began to chant, invoking the gods to witness the sacrifice. The villagers remained silent, watching the scene unfold before them. Akuna dropped to her knees, crying uncontrollably. Chinedu stood beside her, clenching his fist so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He wanted to scream, to stop the madness, but his throat was dry, and his legs felt as though they were made of stone. The chief priest picked up the large wooden pestle and raised it high above his head. The crowd looked in shock. Their eyes were locked on the scene. Akuna let out a wail, her heart breaking into pieces as she watched the pestle hover over her children. Time seemed to slow down, and for a moment, Chinedu felt as though the world had stopped turning. Before we continue our story, kindly hit the subscribe button right now and turn on post notification so that you'll be the first to get updates on our videos. Also, tell us where you're watching from and the African culture you represent in the comment section, and let us know whether you like us to tell a story that depicts your culture. Have you subscribed to this channel? Also like this video right now, and thank you already. Let's continue our story. The pestle came down slowly and hit the twins who were in the mortar. He pounded the children alive, and the blood splashed in the village square. The blood was believed to be accepted by the gods. Akuna, who was on her knees, kept wailing over her loss, and Chinedu let out a painful cry. The whole village mourned, as it was a sad day for Chinedu's family. Everyone returns to their homes afterwards, and the sad atmosphere in the village continued for weeks. 1 year later, after Chinedu and Akuna had recovered from the loss of their twins, Akuna became pregnant again. This brought happiness and comfort to the couple, and they both looked forward to when the baby will be born. The villagers rejoiced with them, and many thought that the gods have decided to bless them again with a child because they were appeased by the sacrifice of the twin babies. In the 9th month of the pregnancy, Akuna was in labor, and she brought forth. The midwife delivered her of a baby boy, and then found out another baby was on its way, a baby girl. She had given birth to twins again. Akuna was devastated as the two babies cried. "Not again," she whispered. Chinedu was devastated when he found out, and this time he planned to escape with the babies. But the news had already gone round the village, and there was no escaping it. The villagers began to gossip about the event. Some said the family was cursed. How can the gods give them twins twice? Some people asked. The chief priest and the elders had instructed Chinedu to bring the children to the village square on the 7th day, just like they did the last time. The children will be pounded alive as a sacrifice to the gods. When the day came, the parents brought the twins and handed over to the chief priest, who placed them in a big mortar and started to chant, calling on the gods to witness the sacrifice while getting ready to pound them alive. He lifted the pestle to hit the babies, and just as it was about to make contact with the twins, a loud voice interrupted the ritual. "Stop!" The voice rang out through the village square. Everyone turned in the direction of the voice, and there stood a stranger, tall, and with a group of men dressed in strange white robes behind him. The villagers were stunned into silence, unsure of who this man was or why he had come. The stranger, who was later introduced as one of the missionaries from a distant land, walked boldly into the square, unafraid of the traditions and superstitions of the village. His eyes were filled with determination, and behind him were other missionaries, men and women, who had traveled with him to bring the message of the gospel. The chief priest lowered the pestle, visibly irritated by the interruption. "Who are you, and how dare you stop the will of the gods?" "I am here with a message of love and truth," the missionary replied. His voice was calm but firm. "The gods you fear are not real. Children are gifts from the true God, and no harm should come to them." The villagers murmured among themselves, unsure of how to react to the missionary's bold statement. Some were intrigued, while others were angry. The chief priest, however, was furious. "You speak lies, stranger. The gods have demanded this sacrifice, and it must be carried out." The missionary shook his head. "No god would demand the blood of innocent children. The twins are a blessing, not a curse. Let them live, and your village will be spared." Akuna, still on her knees, looked up at the stranger with hope in her eyes. Chinedu, too, felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Could this man be telling the truth? Could the gods they had feared all their lives be nothing more than myths? The chief priest was not convinced. You come into our village and speak against our traditions? You dare to question the will of the gods? I do not question the gods, the missionary replied. I am here to tell you that there is only one God, and he does not require the death of children. Your traditions have brought only pain and suffering. It's time to end this practice. The chief priest's face contorted with rage. He raised his staff and pointed it at the missionary. Leave now, or face the wrath of the gods. But the missionary stood his ground. The wrath of the gods is nothing compared to the love of the true God. Let the twins live, and your village will see blessings beyond what you can imagine. The villagers began to murmur again, and this time, some of them were agreeing to the missionary. The seeds of doubt had been planted in their minds. Could it be that they had been wrong all along? The chief priest, sensing that he was losing control over the crowd, turned to the elders for support. But even they seemed conflicted. The villagers had always feared the gods, but the missionary's words were starting to make sense to some of them. Could it be that the gods they had worshipped for generations were nothing more than myths? Chinedu, feeling a surge of courage, stood up and faced the chief priest. If there is a chance that what this man says is true, then we must listen. I cannot let my children die for a tradition that may be wrong. The chief priest glared at Chinedu, his eyes burning with anger. You dare defy the gods? I dare to protect my children, Chinedu replied. His voice was steady. If there's even the slightest chance that we have been mistaken, then I will not let my children be killed. The villagers, seeing Chinedu's courage, began to murmur in agreement. The tide was turning. The chief priest, realizing that he was losing control, raised his staff and shouted, The gods will punish us for this. But the missionary said, There will be no punishment. The only thing that will come from this is freedom from fear and suffering. Let the children live. The crowd was now divided. Some still clung to their old beliefs, but many were starting to believe the missionary's words. The tension in the air was thick, as everyone waited to see what would happen next. For a long moment, the village square remained silent. The chief priest, still fuming with anger, gripped his staff tighter, as if to assert his authority. Yet, it was clear that his hold over the people had weakened. Many of the villagers now looked to the missionary with uncertainty, but also with hope. Chinedu, with his heart pounding, moved closer to the twins lying helpless in the mortar. He looked down at his children, their tiny innocent faces gazing back at him. A flood of emotions surged through him: love, fear, and guilt. These were the children he had longed for, the blessings he and Akuna had prayed for over the years. How could he let them die for a tradition that now seemed senseless? Akuna, still on her knees, reached for Chinedu's hands with desperation. Please, she whispered, let's save our children. The missionary stepped forward once more and said, This is your chance to change your future. It's time to break free from the chains of fear and superstition. These children are not a curse. They are a gift from God. Chinedu looked around at the villagers, his friends, his family. He saw the doubt in their faces too. Maybe, just maybe, they had been wrong all this time. Could he risk his children's lives based on a belief he now questioned? Finally, with a deep breath, Chinedu turned to the chief priest. I can't do it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't let my children die. The chief priest's eyes flared with rage. You defy the gods, Chinedu. You risk bringing their wrath upon us all. But Chinedu shook his head, his voice growing stronger. If these children are a curse, then let the gods come for me. But I will not let them die. Not like this." The crowd looked in shock. The chief priest's authority had never been challenged like this before. But Chinedu stood his ground. He reached into the mortar and gently lifted his children, cuddling them close. A murmur spread through the crowd, and slowly the villagers began to take sides. Some still feared the gods and whispered of the doom that might befall them. But others, inspired by Chinedu's bravery and the missionaries' words, began to question the old ways. Was it truly right to kill these innocent children? The chief priest, realizing he had lost control, raised his staff one last time and pointed it at Chinedu. "You will regret this," he spat. "The gods will make you pay." But Chinedu didn't flinch. He turned to the missionary and nodded. "What do we do now?" The missionary smiled softly. "You've already taken the first step. The rest will come with time. The truth is stronger than any fear." And so, under the watchful eyes of the villagers, Chinedu and Akuna, carrying their twins, walked away from the village square. The whispers of the villagers followed them, but so did the growing hope that perhaps things could be different. Over the coming days, the news spread throughout the village that Chinedu and Akuna had spared their twins, defying the ancient taboo. At first, there was fear. Many believed that the gods would bring terrible misfortune to the village. But when no punishment came, the villagers began to wonder if they had been wrong all along. The missionaries continued to speak to the people, sharing the message of love and the sanctity of life. Slowly, their hearts began to change. Families who had once feared the birth of twins now welcomed them. The village, once bound by superstition, began to see the light of new knowledge and faith. Chinedu and Akuna's twins grew up healthy and strong, and their story became a symbol of courage and change. The villagers looked to them as proof that the gods they had feared were nothing more than myths, and that love and compassion were the essential values of life. Years later, Chinedu and Akuna would sit with their children and tell them the story of how they had been saved from a terrible fate. They would remind them of the importance of standing up for what is right, even when it was difficult. And as they watched their children grow into adults, they were at peace, knowing that the legacy they had left was one of love, courage, and hope. So, the pounding of twins in the village ceased completely, and the people looked back on the old ways with regret. But they also looked forward, knowing that they had been given a second chance, a chance to build a future where all children were seen as a blessing, no matter how many of them were born at the same time. And so, Chinedu and Akuna's story became one of transformation, not just for their family, but for the entire village. A story that was told for generations. All right, so what did you learn from this story? Share it in the comment section. And please subscribe to this channel right now and turn on post notification so that whenever a story is posted, you'll be the first to get notified and you'll be the first to watch. Like and share this. Don't forget to drop your lessons in the comment section. Subscribe and see you in our next story. Bye-bye.